And so I was interested just to dive in a bit around the pivot that you guys sort of made, because the vibe I get is that you guys were sort of heading towards like getting into ministry and that being your sort of focus.
Yeah.
And it feels like there was probably a few pivots along the way. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate way of looking at
Yeah.
it. We're definitely not where we thought we would be, when we got married 17 years ago.
Yeah. So how old were you guys when you got married?
I was 19, so quite mature and grown up.
Yeah.
Dave was 20.
Yeah.
So, older man.
Yeah.
But
well, Melissa was 19 when we got married and
Yeah.
I was 24.
Oh, so you really were mature
an
and grown
old
up.
man.
You were old. you were old, man.
Yeah.
No, we were.
But she was not a gold digger. She still had more money.
She was definitely loved you for yourself.
Yeah.
Good.
That's the goal.
No, we did get married early. And we were talking about this the other day. I think had anyone in my life like actually genuinely said to me, like someone I knew and trusted said, Megs, we really love you. We know you're into this guy, but we don't think you should get married. I think I would have listened. Like I knew I was kind of out on a limb there getting married that young.
Yeah.
But both sets of parents were really like encouraging about it, which in hindsight probably seems a bit fun. But and like, people who knew us both well were just genuinely really stoked for us. So and it's worked out pretty good.
I think everyone was more concerned for Melissa than they were for me. So I think.
Do you think people had conversations with her that they pulled her aside? Sure?
Not like really hard line, but I think there probably were some conversations going around her that they weren't really going to say to me.
Yeah.
Because maybe they thought she was a bit more young and naive and impressionable and be careful.
Like, look out, older guy.
Don't fall for
he
that
might not be in this for
tomfoolery.
the right reasons.
But we got through it and we've worked it out and we've grown together. And
How many years for you guys now?
5 years.
Nice.
I had one of my clients the other day with Youth Connect, and me and her are on our my desktop back screen or whatever. And he goes, "Oh, is that your wife?" I was like, "Oh, that your partner?" I was like, "Yeah, that's my wife." And I was like, "Oh, we actually got that photo on our 5-year anniversary." And he looks at me, wow, with his eyes wide, and he's like, "Wow, 5 years." He goes, "That's a really long time." He goes, "You must be really happy with your life." Like, he's just the sweetest young guy.
So
and he was just like so proud of me. And I was just like, thanks, man.
Look, a 5-year
I
relationship,
yeah.
that's a pretty significant
I literally left that going, oh, I feel so great now. He was just like so proud of me. And he's like, great job. Like, that's really good. Like, that's actually a really amazing thing.
Yeah.
That's
That's kind of nice that
thanks,
someone
mate.
actually, values the work that goes into a relationship and sees
so
that as an achievement.
He's a nice young guy.
Yeah.
So what did it sort of start to look like for you guys making that pivot? What were some of the factors, I guess, that were shaping those directions?
It's probably important to say where we started. And when Dave and I got married, both of us very genuinely believed that we were sort of going to make a career out of ministry. And by ministry, I mean, paid ministry. And so when we got married, Dave was studying a theology course at Anglican Youth Works with the view to becoming a youth worker. So as long as I've known Dave, his number one ambition was always just to work with young people and be a youth worker. And I think that was really inspired by some of the great youth workers that built into his life and really showed him what was possible for him. Yeah. And I think he always sort of wanted to pay that forward. And he's great with young people too.
Awesome. Yeah.
So, and I was, very much on board with that plan because I sort of figured I've been a Christian for as much of my life as I can meaningfully remember. Yeah. And, that's been, that was sort of always presented as like the highest work you could do for God, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like when you were a kid, who did you think of as being the most committed or the most, the most kingdom-minded person, I guess? It was always sort of held up as the person who was dedicating their whole life to God. Yeah. So that was either, a missionary or someone who was pastoring and doing that sort of work. And so we started out with that as, I guess you could say, a goal, but it wasn't ever consciously set. it
it was a default.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it really was. And, you know, that's not a bad thing, but
No.
we probably just kind of assumed that that's what God had for us.
Yeah.
And so we set out on that course and had some good times along the way, and, you know, felt that sense of purpose and the sense of calling. But it probably wasn't until a few years ago now, and when we'd actually kind of become connected to GC, which was, you know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and it was, for me, it was this so overwhelming sense of that I knew I wanted to do something meaningful and connect with people, and, you know, there's not a whole lot more in the world that matters than people, really. So, and I know that Dave felt the same, but we just kind of kept having, not a dead end, but there was just roadblocks to stuff working out. It just didn't ever seem to just happen that way. You know, we'd be maybe going well, you know, we were in a youth ministry for quite a while, and we looked at sort of expanding our role to encompass looking after the children's ministry team, and there was a few other, you know, opportunities that came our way, but things just never sat right.
Yeah.
And I kind of viewed that as like, you know, that sort of, you know, it's a time of waiting, or you just have to wait for the season, and you've got to just stay faithful and, you know, do all of that stuff with the genuine belief that I was just destined to end up there eventually, and I just had to wait it out.
Yeah.
And then it just, that kind of didn't eventuate.
Yeah.
And I guess it was early in those days that we connected with GC that actually it was probably Maddie Rendell, who is a GC legend.
Yeah. Did you get Rendelled?
I got Rendelled. I've been Rendelled a lot lot of times, and I always love it. But yeah, he had this conversation with me, and he's like, why do you just assume that that's who you're meant to be? I think I was complaining to him that I don't think I was going to make a very good pastor's wife. And he was like, why do you assume that that's what you need to be? And I was like, well, because Dave is so clearly meant to be a pastor. And he's like, why do you assume that? And I was like, oh.
Okay.
Yeah. And it wasn't offensive. It was just like, oh, that's genuinely never occurred to me before.
It was a polite slap across the face.
It really was. It really was. And it was a good one. Like, it was one I really needed, because he said, if you don't think that you fit this role and it's not who you are, then why are you so convinced that that's what God has for you?
Yeah.
And from that moment, I probably really started to question and explore this idea that you can have significance and be crucial to kingdom building and, you know, to actually minister, but that doesn't have to look like a role.
Yeah.